Hi. All good things come to an end, and all pleasures have to be paid for in life. This is a philosophical fact. And one of the pleasures that always has to be paid for is the pleasure of eating in a restaurant. That is one reason why the term restaurant bill is la douloureuse in French, the painful one. Just imagine, you're sitting there, lulled by the background music, having got through your carpaccio and your filet mignon, and you're just savouring the aftertaste of the profiterole and contemplating your little Italian espresso, and inevitably a discreet man in a white coat will come along and place a little white slip with figures on it, which in a few days' time will bring about automatically a reduction in your net worth. That is the payment you have to make for the pleasure of eating. Now, the term restaurant bill, which is what I'm talking about, or tab in American, is one that everyone has to learn very quickly in a language. And after all, I'm addressing linguists here. It's not necessary to learn how to interpret or translate the entire content of a restaurant menu. And indeed, I would say that that is one of the most advanced stages of language knowledge, to be able to tackle some restaurant menus effectively. However, there is one simple word which everyone needs to know from the start, because at the end of the day, everyone has to pay, and that is the word for bill. So whether it's conto in Italian, or счет in Russian, or addition in French, or Rechnung in German, this is an essential piece of vocabulary which all interpreters should know from an early stage in learning a language, and which is in all the phrase books. Now, a restaurant bill is a very sensitive thing, and the more expensive it is, the more sensitive it is. It's particularly sensitive in public administration. In my job, I occasionally have to organize calls to tender for the training of interpreters, collective training courses, and I have to consider what to include in those calls to tender. I can include, for example, an excursion. I can include a visit to a theatre. But if I include a lunch or a dinner, I know very well that the financial controllers will say to me, "Oh no, that's not allowed. That is junketing, eating at the expense of the taxpayer." So there is something about eating, particularly eating at public expense, which is particularly sensitive. And it's no chance that the famous economist Milton Friedman gave as his core principle of free market economics, if you like, that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Now, one of the important questions that you always have to solve in relation to restaurant bills is the question of who pays. If you're inviting a business partner, if you're inviting a customer in particular, you know that it's probably you who's going to pay. If you're dating somebody, I don't know, this takes me back some time now, but there's an assumption, certainly in many countries, or there was, that the guy will have to foot the bill. So those situations are quite clear. Nonetheless, there are many situations where it's not clear who pays the bill. This is the case, for example, if you go out to eat with colleagues after work, or if you're on a mission, or if you go out to eat with friends. How do you share the bill? I think there are two extreme situations here. One is that everyone gets out their calculator and they start working out exactly how much everyone consumed and adding it up, and that takes about 20 minutes, and there's lots of toing and froing, and people are putting money in the middle of the table and taking it back again, and at the end of the day probably the sum doesn't add up and somebody else has got to contribute more, and that takes another 20 minutes discussion, and so on. That's if everyone is sober. If they've had too much to drink, what might tend to happen is that the most sober person at the table will simply roughly divide the amount by the number of participants to the nearest €5, and everyone will fumble for their cash and put that amount on the table. And if there's not enough, then the most sober person out of the group will round up the sum and put in the money themselves. Those would be the two extremes, I would see. But there are all kinds of other questions, like if you didn't drink, for example, should you be invited to foot the bill for the drinks? That's a frequent question. But I'd like to end up by referring to the fact that there are apparently many restaurants these days with the financial crisis which are not getting the income that they got in the past from their bills. And this is particularly the case in New York, where all these financial executives from Wall Street are no longer on their expense accounts, which enabled them to wine and dine at the expense of their companies and have the tab picked up by their employer. There is now a site on the internet that you can visit called expenserstake.com, where you can simply type in the amount that you spent, and the site will work out for you. There's a little application, will work out for you and print the bills which correspond to that amount, which are bills normally from cheaper restaurants or from stationery stores or from other places, and the sum will magically add up to that amount that you spent in your expensive restaurant. So you can take this sheet of paper that you printed from the site, you can present it to your employer. All the photocopies conveniently look like tabs that have been torn off or wrinkled, and they look like genuine forms of expenditure. You can take these tabs along to your employer and claim that these were your expenses and ask for the reimbursement of them. That seems one way for me in which to cope with la douloureuse or the restaurant bill. Thank you.